Greetings. Welcome back to my garage. We had some astronauts almost make history a few days back. Almost. Within a couple of minutes of making history. And it's kind of tough to make history when you're talking about space travel and astronauts going into space and space stations because we've been doing it for like 60 years. In fact, it was back in May of 1961 that we had our first astronaut, Alan Shepard. He didn't quite go into outer space, but he left Earth and he was in a suborbit for about 15 minutes and then he came back down. And then about 10 months later is when John Glenn was the first American astronaut to kind of make it up into outer space, and he actually got into orbit around the Earth. So 1961, that's 60 years ago. That's a long time ago. So how are we still making history with astronauts heading into space? Well, our space program has progressed and changed, and then it kind of went into like pushed pause. So the last bit we've had were the space shuttles that we would send crews up into space in the 80s and the early 90s. But then we retired those. We, as in the United States and NASA and the government of the United States, we retired those and we just don't use them anymore. We still send astronauts to space, but we don't do it from America. We have to send them to Russia, and we pay Russia to hop on one of their rockets if they want to go up to the International Space Station. So it costs a lot of money to send people to space. And so the United States government has been wondering if perhaps there were some companies instead of governments that want to try it out. So that's where we get Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' company, and now SpaceX is Elon Musk's company. And SpaceX is the one who is sending some people up into space. And what makes it historic is that no private company, no commercial rocket has ever been sent to space with people on it. SpaceX has been sending rockets up to the space station for, I think, a couple of years now, delivering supplies, and those are unmanned craft. So like pretty much send a robot to space. This was to be the first time we have a company sending up human beings into space. And so that was supposed to happen, I believe it was Wednesday, and they were in the rocket and they were on the launch pad and they were, T-minus 17 minutes to go, and they call it scrub. They scrubbed the mission. And they scrubbed it because of the weather for two reasons. One, well, what they're going to do is they're going to send up not cans of soda, but they've got their rocket, and the rocket's called the Demo 2 that SpaceX has made, the Demo 2 rocket. And on top of the Demo 2 rocket is the Crew Dragon, and that's where the people hang out. And so this part really just is a rocket that gets you up into space, and this is where the astronauts sit. So that's the top chunk of the rocket. So most of the rocket you see is not where people are hanging out. You can't walk down here and go to the gym or anything like that. You're sitting right up in here. So once this thing heads off into space, if something were to go horribly wrong really early on in the launch, then this part would just detach and splash down in the ocean. So when they talk about the weather, they're not just talking about clouds right around the rocket, but they're talking about clouds and weather even out into the Atlantic Ocean if this had to eject early. So they have to make sure it's pretty good conditions. Plus, it has to kind of line up with where the International Space Station is. It's constantly cruising around, and they can't just like launch and then wait for the space station to show up. So the next time they're going to try this trick will be Saturday at about 12:30, I think. And right now, you got about a 60% chance of it not working. So 40% chance of the weather being good enough to go for it. And that would be live. This is something that we would be watching in the classroom. We would have been watching live in the classroom had we been in the classroom and had it worked. So this is interesting. I will be keeping track of it and seeing how it goes. If it doesn't work for Saturday, they've got one more day. Sunday, they have it kind of set up to launch. And after that, they haven't really thought that far out. I mean, they haven't told us they've thought that far out. My guess is they've thought that far out. So hopefully on Saturday we're gonna set make some history on Saturday by having a company, SpaceX, send some people up into space for the first time and have them hook on to the International Space Station, which has been up there for many years, and then come on back down nice and safe. So hopefully this kind of opens up the door for a whole new section of space travel and more space exploration. So I'll get back to you guys next week. We have moved into phase 2 of the safe reopening of Washington State. And so we'll talk about that a little bit next week. I did notice that this week we're a little bit thin on our online participation. We had a great class meeting on Tuesday. 15, 16 of you showed up. That's about average for us. A couple faces that we normally didn't see, but a couple faces we haven't seen in a while did show up, so that's great. But there's only been, I think, 5 or 6 people on IXL so far this week, and only about 4 or 5 been regularly hitting Epic Books. So we only have a couple weeks to go, you guys. One more new information packet, and then after that it's going to be review packet and then field day packet. So get my rocket out of the way, and until next week, hi to.